Hello, I am Toby Faber. I am the author of Faber and Faber, The Untold Story, and I'm here to welcome you to the Faber Archive, where I'm going to show you some of the treasures that we have here. And so I start off actually by showing you the table, because this table, this octagonal oak table, is the table at which my grandfather, who founded Faber and Faber, used to chair the book committee that met every Wednesday and still essentially meets every Wednesday. And I should also point out that we are being overlooked by the Epstein bust of T.S. Eliot, who was almost my grandfather's first recruit. So the first book, of course, I should show you, is the first book that Faber ever published, Spain in a Two-Seater. You soon see things moving on in terms of the design and the artistic quality of the books, because another one of my grandfather's recruits, and another really important first recruit, was Richard de la Mare. So one of the first things that Richard de la Mare did, for example, and this was, I think, his own idea, was to issue first editions of poems, each with their own little pamphlet like that. They were called the Ariel Poems. About half a dozen of them came out every Christmas. Interesting idea in itself to publish poetry like this. They came with their own envelope. You bought them instead of a Christmas card, essentially. And it would have been a lovely Christmas card to send somebody, because not only did it have a poem generally on a Christmas theme, each also came with their own original artwork. Edward Borden illustrated Popular Song by Edith Sitwell, here with this rather lovely bucolic scene. Edward Borden would still be doing covers for Faber right up until the 1970s. First bestseller, Memoirs of a Fox Hunting Man. Again, I have to say the credit for this must go to Richard de la Mare. Siegfried Sassoon was a friend of the de la Mares. Met Richard de la Mare at his father's house in the summer of 1928. Said, "I'm writing a book about fox hunting, what do you think?" Richard de la Mare said, "Yes, please." It arrived in instalments, and we published it very quickly in autumn 1928, and it was an immediate bestseller. So you're still not really getting anything very exciting in terms of the covers of Faber and Guire. And so what I like to do is I like to contrast that with its sequel that now comes out under the Faber and Faber livery, Memoirs of an Infantry Officer. You're seeing a lovely Barnett Friedman cover here, autolithograph, so it's carved on stone with this hand-drawn lettering that you see here. And it's almost as though once Faber and Faber takes over from Faber and Guire, and probably at this point I should say there only ever was one Faber, my grandfather. Just sounds grander than plain Faber. There are many stories about how he came up with the name, but I think most people's favourite is that it was Walter de la Mare, so Richard's father, who said, "You can't have too much of a good thing, why not call it Faber and Faber?" But anyway, it became Faber and Faber in 1929, and all of a sudden you really do start to see the creative juices starting to flow. During the war, we have a new cover designer arrives at Faber, Berthold Volpe. He wasn't just a brilliant designer, he was in particular a brilliant typographer. He designed a number of the great typefaces that are still in use today, most famously his Albertus typeface, which he would use so much on Faber books that people started to call it the Faber typeface. We see the Albertus typeface on For the Union Dead by Robert Lowell, just an absolutely classic Volpe cover. After the Second World War, that you see Faber, frankly, with its first generation of publishers getting older, needing to renew itself. Eliot was brilliant in many things. One of the ways in which he was brilliant was in seeing that. And there's a lovely exchange of letters in which he writes to my grandfather saying, essentially, you and I aren't getting any younger. We have to find some new young blood to come into the firm. And I think if my grandfather particular brilliance, it was that he was a brilliant recruiter. He'd obviously recruited all these great people for the first generation of the firm, and he went on to do it again for a second generation of people arriving at Faber, most famously Charles Monteith. And I thought I would just show you the most famous of Charles Monteith's discoveries, which happened, I think, practically within a week of his arrival at Faber. So he'd arrived at Faber as a new young editor on a year's probation, and he came across one particular letter. It was, as I say, it was attached to a very dog-eared manuscript that had clearly been around a lot of other publishers already and been rejected by them. And this is what the letter says. "Dear Sir, I send you the typescript of my novel, Strangers from Within, which might be defined as an allegorical interpretation of a stock situation." I think it's fair to say that's not a selling cover letter. And indeed, the manuscript that Charles Monteith picked up had already been read by the Faber reader. And she's written her comments here, across the top of the letter. "Time, the future. Absurd and uninteresting fantasy about the explosion of an atom bomb on the colonies. A group of children who land in jungle country near New Guinea. Rubbish and dull, pointless, and there's a big R for reject at the end of it. Well, Charles read beyond that rather rubbish and dull first chapter, got into something behind it he thought was much more interesting. And I suppose I should tell you what the book was that resulted by telling you the end of the letter. I hope you will feel able to publish it. Yours faithfully, William Golding. It was indeed Lord of the Flies. So that was in 1953. Here's a memo that Charles Monteith wrote in 1957. That's his red typewriting there. And what he's talking about in this memo is a book of poetry that's coming in from a young poet he hasn't heard of before, but it's won a poetry prize in America. He thinks the book of poems is very uneven, but perhaps Mr. Eliot could take a look at it. You can see it's addressed to Mr. Eliot at the top there in a rather wonderfully formal way. But perhaps Mr. Eliot could take a look at it, and if he agrees, send this young poet a letter of encouragement. What does Eliot say? Well, again, this is his handwriting in the pencil across the bottom of, again, this rather great foundation document. I'm inclined to think we ought to take this man now. Let's discuss him. TSE. And the man they're talking about is Ted Hughes. They are talking about Ted Hughes's first book. Robert McCrum arrives in 1979 and starts to revive Faber's fiction list. And so here I have the first letter from Kazuo Shiguro, sent to Faber and Faber. Starts, Dear Mr. McCrum. They became Robert and Ish very soon after that. I was told recently by Malcolm Bradbury that you had contacted him in connection with a new Faber collection. I just love at the end. He says, so he sent him his short stories. He says, P.S. I enclose stamped addressed envelope, just in case you want to send it back. And Robert, it's like things a generation before with T.S. Eliot and Charles Monteith. At the bottom of the letter, I vote for these, R. McC. And at this time as well, in the 1980s, we are going through another design revolution, actually. And we go to an external design agency called Pentagram. And Pentagram actually take responsibility for our covers for a while. They come up with the FF logo. That is now a familiar part of the Faber branding. Two last books where you see the other aspect of what Pentagram did for the more mainstream books, the idea of a box where you put all the information about the book. Very flexible design concept because you can put that box anywhere you like on the cover, but also very strong branding. And here you are seeing the Pentagram box on the Booker Prize winner in 1988, Peter Carey's Oscar and Lucinda. Here you are seeing it again on the Booker Prize winner in 1989, Kazuo Shiguro's Remains of the Day. I've been sitting at this table for the last couple of years, looking through files, trying to build up from those files the story of how Faber and Faber became what it is. And I started off by going through management files, actually, and here's a management file called Sales Manager, 1929 to 1934. I'm just going through this file, and all of a sudden I come across a letter from T.S. Eliot that had never been found before, never seen before. Starts, My Dear Geoffrey, of course. It's from the 4th of August, 1933. And then I turn it over, and this is how the letter closes. And what it closes is with a poem, as far as I know, by T.S. Eliot. As far as I know, a poem that has never been published before. So this is the exclusive. My vocations are tedious and trivial. My manners are mild and entrancing. My tastes are compact and convivial. 1 eating, 2 drinking, 3 dancing.